The clock above the nurse's station ticked steadily, marking the end of Sarah Bennett's 12-hour shift at St. Mercy Hospital. Her feet ached from hours of walking the hallways, tending to patients who relied on her gentle demeanor and unwavering dedication. Though exhausted, Sarah smiled at each person she passed on her way out. She had chosen nursing not for the money, which was barely enough to cover her bills, but because she believed in the power of kindness to heal more than just the body. Sarah's days were a balancing act. Between long shifts, caring for her patients, and juggling her modest finances, she barely had time for herself. Her small apartment was sparse, with just enough furniture to make it feel lived in. She often skipped meals to stretch her paycheck, and even though she worked tirelessly, her student loans loomed like an ever-present shadow. Yet, Sarah rarely complained. She had seen too much suffering in her patients to dwell on her own challenges for long. On her way home that evening, Sarah stopped at the small pharmacy near her apartment to pick up a prescription. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and she stepped into a modest space lined with shelves of medicines and basic household items. Sarah waited patiently in line, her mind wandering to her plans for the evening, reheating last night's leftovers, and maybe reading the secondhand novel she had picked up weeks ago. Ahead of her in line, a frail elderly man clutched a prescription slip in one hand and a worn wallet in the other. His weathered face held an air of quiet desperation as he spoke to the pharmacist. "I understand," the pharmacist said kindly, "but the total is $62. I'm sorry, sir. I can't dispense it without payment." The man nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. I only have $20, he murmured. "Is there a way to just get half the prescription?" The pharmacist shook her head apologetically. "Unfortunately, I can't split this medication." The man hesitated, his shoulders slumping as he turned away. His eyes briefly met Sarah's, and in that moment she felt the weight of his burden. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Wait," Sarah said, her voice steady yet gentle. "I'll cover the rest." The man looked at her in surprise, his eyes widening. "Miss, you don't have to." "It's okay," Sarah interrupted with a reassuring smile. "Please, let me help." The pharmacist glanced at Sarah, who pulled out her debit card without hesitation. It wasn't a grand gesture. Sarah didn't have much in her account, but she knew the man's need outweighed her own. "Thank you," the man whispered as the transaction processed. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to," Sarah replied. "Just take care of yourself." After the man left with his medication, Sarah gathered her own prescription and headed home. She didn't dwell on her action, brushing it off as something any decent person would do. She returned to her tiny apartment, where the lingering scent of her last meal reminded her that money would be tight until her next paycheck. Sarah's dinner that night was a simple plate of spaghetti. The sauce was slightly watery because she had stretched it with some broth, knowing it had to last her through the week. She ate slowly, her thoughts drifting back to the man at the pharmacy. She wondered about his life, what struggles he faced, and whether he had family to support him. The thought made her glance around her small kitchen and sigh. Her life wasn't easy, but at least she had a roof over her head and the ability to work. Her phone buzzed on the counter, drawing her attention. It was a notification that her bank balance had dropped below her preset warning threshold. The pharmacy purchase had been the tipping point. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had she done the right thing? Should she have been more cautious with her money? She pushed the thought aside. Helping the man felt right. And Sarah always believed that the world had a way of rewarding kindness, even if she couldn't see it immediately. She finished her meal, cleaned up the few dishes she owned, and sank into her worn-out couch with the dog-eared novel. The words blurred as her exhaustion caught up with her, but her heart felt lighter, knowing she had made someone's day a little better. That night, as Sarah lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, she thought about her choices. Life wasn't easy, but she would keep doing what she could for others. It was the only way she knew how to live. For now, the warmth of her small act of kindness was enough to brighten the struggles of her own life, even if just for a little while. The next day began like any other. Sarah arrived at the hospital early, slipping into her scrubs and preparing for another long shift. The routine comforted her, checking vital signs, administering medications, and offering words of encouragement to her patients. She worked on autopilot, her thoughts occasionally drifting back to the elderly man at the pharmacy. It wasn't until her lunch break that the weight of her generosity began to settle in. Sitting in the staff lounge, Sarah opened her bank app to check her balance. As expected, it was dishearteningly low. With rent due in just a few days, she calculated how far she could stretch the remaining dollars. She'd have to cut back even more, skipping her weekly coffee from the hospital cafe and opting for canned soup until payday. Her colleague Lisa sat down across from her, balancing a precarious sandwich in one hand and her phone in the other. "What's got you looking so serious?" Lisa asked, eyeing Sarah's furrowed brow. "Oh, just bills," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. "The usual." Lisa groaned in solidarity. "Tell me about it. They ought to pay us more for what we do. Seriously, who else works this hard and still eats ramen every other night?" Sarah chuckled softly, though she didn't mention that ramen would have been a luxury compared to her current situation. "We make do," she said, changing the subject. She didn't want to seem ungrateful or burden her friend with her worries. The rest of the shift passed uneventfully, though Sarah felt the fatigue in her bones more acutely than usual. By the time she arrived home, she was too tired to think about dinner. She dropped her bag by the door, kicked off her shoes, and collapsed onto the couch. Her phone buzzed on the table, but she ignored it, assuming it was another bill reminder. It buzzed again, and then again. Finally, curiosity got the better of her. Picking up the phone, Sarah saw 3 missed calls from an unfamiliar number. She frowned. Telemarketers, probably, she thought, but as she set the phone down, it began buzzing again. The same number. Reluctantly, she answered. "Hello. Is this Nurse Sarah Bennett?" a warm, composed voice asked. "Yes. This is Sarah," she replied cautiously. "Who's calling?" "This is Jonathan Harrington," the man said. "You don't know me, but I was at the pharmacy yesterday. I overheard your conversation with the elderly gentleman you helped." Sarah's heart sank for a moment. Had she done something wrong? "Oh," she said hesitantly. "I didn't realize anyone was listening." "I wasn't trying to intrude," Dr. Harrington continued, his tone reassuring. "I was simply struck by what you did. It's not often you see someone go out of their way for a stranger like that." Sarah felt a wave of embarrassment. "It wasn't a big deal," she said quickly. "He needed help, so I helped." Dr. Harrington chuckled softly. "That's exactly what makes it remarkable. I wanted to reach out to you for 2 reasons. First, I'd like to express my gratitude. What you did was inspiring, and I'd like to send you something as a gesture of appreciation." Sarah's stomach flipped. "Oh, that's really not necessary." "Please hear me out," he interrupted gently. "I'm the director of Harrington Memorial Hospital. We're always looking for people like you, compassionate, hard-working individuals who put others first. If you're open to it, I'd like to discuss offering you a position at our facility." The words hung in the air, too surreal for Sarah to process immediately. A position, she repeated dumbly. "Yes," Dr. Harrington said. "Your kindness didn't just make a difference for that gentleman. It made an impression on me. I'd like to meet with you to discuss this further, if you're interested." Sarah felt her cheeks flush. She struggled to find the right words. "I don't know what to say. This is all so unexpected." "Take your time," he said warmly. "I'll send you my contact information. Think it over, and we can talk whenever you're ready." After thanking him and ending the call, Sarah sat in stunned silence. She stared at her phone, the reality of the conversation slowly sinking in. Could this really be happening? Was this a genuine opportunity, or was it too good to be true? She felt a strange mix of emotions: hope, disbelief, and a cautious optimism. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel quite so heavy. The following morning, Sarah woke with a strange sense of anticipation. She hadn't dreamed of the phone call. It had been real. Her phone buzzed with a text as she sipped her lukewarm coffee. It was from the unfamiliar number. "Good morning, Nurse Bennett. This is Dr. Harrington. I've emailed you some details about the job opportunity. Please let me know if you have any questions. Best regards." Sarah set the cup down, her hands trembling slightly. Opening her laptop, she found the email and clicked it open. The message was professional yet warm, outlining a potential nursing role at Harrington Memorial Hospital. The position came with a significant pay increase, better benefits, and a supportive team environment. As tempting as it sounded, Sarah hesitated. She had grown comfortable at St. Mercy, despite the challenges. Leaving felt risky, even if it meant more financial stability. She closed the laptop and decided to focus on her shift, hoping the busyness of the day would clear her thoughts. By mid-morning, St. Mercy's halls were bustling. Sarah moved from patient to patient, her hands steady despite her restless mind. She found herself thinking about the elderly man from the pharmacy. Did he take his medication last night? Was he feeling better today? During a quiet moment, Sarah passed the staff lounge and overheard a few nurses chatting. "Did you hear about the pharmacy incident?" one of them said. "What are you talking about?" another asked. "Some big-shot doctor was there and saw a nurse pay for a patient's meds out of her own pocket. I guess he was impressed because he's offering her a job at his hospital." Sarah froze. They were talking about her. She ducked into a supply closet before anyone could spot her, her heart pounding. The news had spread faster than she could have imagined, and suddenly the weight of the situation felt heavier. As she reorganized boxes of gloves and bandages to calm herself, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from her bank. She opened it, expecting another balance alert, but her eyes widened in disbelief. A deposit for $5,000 had been made to her account. The note read, "For your kindness, Dr. J. Harrington." Her breath caught in her throat. The amount was overwhelming, almost unreal. For a moment, she felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't helped the man at the pharmacy expecting anything in return. Yet, as the initial shock subsided, a different emotion began to take root: relief. This money could cover her rent for months, pay down a portion of her student loans, and even allow her to fix the wobbly kitchen table she had been ignoring for years. But the job offer still lingered in her mind. Was this Dr. Harrington's way of convincing her to leave St. Mercy? Could she handle such a drastic change? That evening, Sarah returned home with a sense of purpose. She cleared her small dining table, sat down with her laptop, and began writing an email. "Dear Dr. Harrington, thank you for the incredible gesture and the job offer. I'm deeply moved by your kindness. However, I'd like to meet in person to discuss the role further. I believe decisions like this are best made face to face." After pressing send, Sarah leaned back in her chair. She didn't know what the future held, but she was determined to approach it with an open heart. For the first time in a long while, the prospect of change didn't feel so daunting. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something new. A week later, Sarah found herself driving to Harrington Memorial Hospital. The facility was situated just outside the city, surrounded by tall trees and manicured gardens. It exuded a sense of calm that contrasted sharply with the urban chaos of St. Mercy. She had spent the last few days carefully weighing her options. The $5,000 deposit had provided much-needed relief, but it wasn't just about the money. The job offer felt like a chance to step into something bigger, to use her skills in an environment where kindness and care were truly valued. Still, the thought of starting over was intimidating. The receptionist greeted her warmly and directed her to the second floor. Sarah's heart thudded as she stepped into the elevator, clutching her modest tote bag like a lifeline. When the doors opened, Dr. Jonathan Harrington was waiting for her. "Sarah Bennett," he said with a wide smile, extending his hand. He was tall and neatly dressed, with an air of quiet authority that put her at ease. "Dr. Harrington," Sarah replied, shaking his hand. "Please, call me Jonathan," he said, gesturing toward a glass-walled office. Come in. Let's talk. The office was spacious but unpretentious, decorated with photos of smiling staff and handwritten thank you notes from patients. Jonathan sat across from her at a round table, his demeanor more like a mentor than a superior. I want to thank you again for what you did at the pharmacy, he began. That kind of compassion isn't something you can teach, Sarah. It's clear you care deeply about your patients. And that's exactly the kind of person we need here. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. I appreciate the kind words, but I was just doing what I thought was right. And that's what makes you remarkable, Jonathan said, leaning forward slightly. I read through your resume after our call. Your experience is impressive, but it's your values that stand out. We've built a team here that thrives on empathy, and I believe you'd be an excellent fit. For the next hour, they discussed the role in detail. Harrington Memorial wasn't just a hospital, it was a community-focused institution, with outreach programs for underserved populations and initiatives to address the root causes of health inequities. The position offered Sarah a chance to work in both the hospital and these community projects, blending clinical care with advocacy. What do you think? Jonathan asked as they wrapped up the conversation. Sarah hesitated, her hands resting on her lap. It sounds incredible, she admitted. But I'm nervous about leaving St. Mercy. I've been there since I started my career. It feels like home, even with all its challenges. Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. Change is always hard, he said. But sometimes, stepping out of your comfort zone leads to the greatest growth. We don't need an answer today. Take your time to decide. Whatever you choose, I have no doubt you'll continue making a difference. On her drive home, Sarah replayed the conversation in her mind. Jonathan's words resonated with her. The idea of blending her nursing skills with community outreach excited her in a way she hadn't felt in years. When she pulled into her apartment complex, she noticed her neighbor, Mrs. Parker, struggling to carry groceries up the stairs. Sarah rushed to help, carrying the heavy bags to the woman's door. You're an angel, Mrs. Parker said with a tired smile. Sarah laughed softly. Just doing what I can. The simple act of helping reminded Sarah of why she had chosen this path in the first place. Nursing wasn't just a job for her, it was a calling. Whether she stayed at St. Mercy or moved to Harrington Memorial, she wanted to make sure that her work always reflected the values she held dear. That night, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table, drafting a list of pros and cons. The decision wasn't easy, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't afraid of change anymore. The kindness she had shown at the pharmacy had come back to her in ways she never expected, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. 2 weeks later, Sarah walked into Harrington Memorial Hospital wearing a brand new set of scrubs and clutching her staff badge. The past few days had been a whirlwind of goodbyes and preparations. Leaving St. Mercy had been bittersweet. Her colleagues, though surprised, had been supportive, offering heartfelt hugs and promises to stay in touch. Her final conversation with Dr. Harrington had sealed her decision. He had assured her that the transition would be smooth and that her contributions would be valued. More importantly, he had emphasized that her kindness was not just a trait, it was a strength that could inspire others. Now, standing in the bustling halls of her new workplace, Sarah felt a mix of nervous energy and excitement. A nurse named Carla greeted her with a warm smile and led her on a tour. Harrington Memorial was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The hospital buzzed with a sense of purpose, its staff embodying the same compassion that Dr. Harrington had described. Sarah spent her first week shadowing Carla, learning the ropes of her new role. The work was challenging, but the environment was invigorating. Each day, she discovered new ways the hospital was making an impact, from organizing health fairs in low-income neighborhoods to offering free wellness programs for senior citizens. One afternoon, Sarah was assigned to a community outreach event at a nearby senior center. She spent hours conducting health checks and chatting with the residents, her warmth putting them at ease. As she prepared to leave, a familiar voice stopped her in her tracks. Well, if it isn't my angel from the pharmacy. She turned to see the elderly man she had helped weeks ago, sitting in a wheelchair with a broad smile. Mr. Daniel, Sarah said, her heart swelling with joy. How are you feeling? Better than ever. Thanks to you, he said. When the hospital staff came to visit, they convinced me to join this program. It's been a blessing. Sarah knelt beside him, overwhelmed by the full circle moment. Seeing him healthy and happy reaffirmed her belief that small acts of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she couldn't always foresee. That evening, as Sarah drove home, she thought about how much her life had changed. The struggles she had faced at St. Mercy, the decision to help a stranger despite her own challenges, and the opportunity that had followed it all seemed to connect in a way that felt almost serendipitous. Back at her apartment, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, now adorned with a sturdy new chair she had finally been able to afford. She opened her laptop to draft an email to Lisa and her former colleagues at St. Mercy, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to visit Harrington Memorial's next community event. Her phone buzzed with another email, a thank you note from a patient she had helped earlier that day. Reading it, Sarah smiled, feeling deeply fulfilled. In the weeks and months that followed, Sarah's work at Harrington Memorial flourished. She became a trusted member of the team, known not only for her clinical skills but also for her ability to connect with patients on a personal level. Dr. Harrington often remarked that her presence had inspired a renewed sense of compassion throughout the hospital. Sarah's life wasn't without challenges. There were still long shifts and moments of exhaustion, but her heart was lighter. She had found a place where her values aligned with her work, where kindness wasn't just appreciated but celebrated. And it all began with a simple act of generosity at a small pharmacy. As Sarah turned off the lights and climbed into bed that night, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The warmth of gratitude filled her chest, reminding her that the most profound changes often stem from the smallest gestures. With that thought, she closed her eyes, ready to face whatever the next day would bring.